Aid agencies are struggling to get help to millions of people affected by devastating floods across South Asia. More than 1,200 people are believed to have died. It's thought to be the worst monsoon season in decades, with tens of thousands of people forced from their homes in India, Nepal and Bangladesh.
The first pictures now coming in from Puerto Rico after taking a direct hit. Hurricane Maria slamming into the island, and as you heard, one official saying the island is destroyed.
It's a race against time now in South Florida and beyond. The storm, now wider than the Florida Peninsula, forecasters saying it could pave a path of destruction the length and width of the state.
I read at one point a quote ostensibly from Blackout that said, "We did not inherit this land from our ancestors, we are borrowing it from our grandchildren." And that type of attitude or perspective sort of turns the Western model on its head, if you will, but sustainability really should be something that we embrace if we appreciate the sort of unusual circumstances we find ourselves in as living, breathing creatures with a consciousness.
100% renewable energy. We love to get excited about things like solar power and wind technologies, and we should be excited about that. And it is possible. I mean, if you think about the trajectory of our culture, at one point we had no electricity and it seemed impossible to provide electricity to every home, especially in a rural landscape. But we've just about done that now. So that gives me hope when I think about these overwhelming ideas like transitioning to renewable energies. That even at the beginning, though it may seem impossible, we are, as a species, capable of great ingenuity. If we really want to do it, if we really support that idea, we'll find a way to make it happen. And we can do things collectively very rapidly.
We pride ourselves in having, beautiful mountains and lakes and so forth, and so there is a sense of strong environmentalism in the state, but that hasn't translated yet into renewable energy. We should have many more wind turbines, for example, in the state. We have great locations for wind turbines in state, and we have the Gulf of Maine, which has huge potential on offshore wind. That hasn't happened yet. Solar energy is booming pretty much. But the municipalities and towns that could make the best use of that, they have a hard time with funding because the state doesn't give much in funding, and funding in New Hampshire is all based on the property taxes. So it's hard to manage enough revenue to invest in things like that, even though schools, town halls, municipal facilities could all be generating their own energy.
We can also buy our electricity from electricity companies, providers. Right. It has become cheaper over the last decade to buy it than it is to produce it on campus. To date, we have installed our first pretty large solar array on campus. It's in Hyde Hall. It's been up and running for, it's in the third year now. And it has worked flawlessly. Wow. So we pay less for that solar power than we pay for the electricity we buy. I'm happy to share that currently we have a project underway that seems like it should happen to put a 355 kilowatt array on top of the PE Center.
Microgrids are a form of organization of energy use and energy production compared to the current standard power grids that we have now. We have electricity powered throughout the country in big, massive installations. And usually the power source of the electricity tend to be big plants, large power sources. And the thinking has been that in the future, since bigger projects like that are no longer being built and financially not easy to build, it would be better to have smaller units of power generation and also smaller units of users. And with renewable energy becoming something that many people would like to do on their own or with other members of the community, how can they organize a unit that would be both helpful in renewable energy production, as well as be able to fit into the grid system that we have right now.
Solar energy actually is the future, and the future is now. The potential to tap this resource is hard to even begin to imagine. I think so much available energy hits the surface of this planet on a daily basis that if we would simply take advantage of this opportunity, we could deliver a clean, sustainable source to meet our demands globally for centuries. The question is, how do we get there from here? And for most folks, familiarity becomes the most subtle addiction in the world. And solar energy itself may seem like science fiction, but the reality is that that train has already left the station and people are adopting this technology globally. The United States would probably do well in the larger scheme of things to jump on board and maybe even take a leadership position instead of following other nations in this quest.
And a microgrid would be basically something like a neighborhood getting together to say, we want to help, we want to build renewable energy in our community, solar, wind, or energy efficiency projects to use for our own consumption, and also to provide additional power to the grid that we don't use and be able to get credit for it.
The fossil fuel industry has enjoyed a chain of subsidies for a century, and it's going to take some time, I think, for renewable energy to catch up when someone has a century head start. And yet the leadership for this transition seems to be coming in great measures from the bottom up. Consumers are interested in this. They see the importance of it and the relevance to their cash flow in the short term, but the legacy to leave a planet in better shape perhaps than they found it for their great-grandchildren.
What we decided to do, and we built into our master plan for the institution, is that buildings we should strive to build buildings that meet, at a minimum, LEED Silver certification. The awareness that it brought to those people who design, plan, and build buildings as to the value that it brings to the campus, not only in dollar terms, but in environmental terms as well.
There are a number of projects that stand out. These are big projects. A typical nuclear reactor may be about 1,000 megawatts. Well, they're talking about purchasing 10 megawatts or 20 megawatts of power from Canada for hydropower, or offshore wind, hundreds of wind turbines generating maybe 10 megawatts each. This is a big project that supplies a big chunk of power. And once they do that, they are displacing fossil fuels that they would be buying otherwise and reducing their carbon footprint, their greenhouse gas emissions, which many states have set goals to reduce that in the future. And by incentivizing these renewable energy projects, they are actually pushing down the cost of renewable energy because of demand for that project, while at the same time renewable energies such as solar and wind are actually getting cheaper and cheaper every year anyway.
At this point in the state of New Hampshire, I think most homeowners would see the same amount of money being spent over the next 8 years paying an electric bill to an incumbent utility that they would spend for a solar array today. So it's not so much a question of if you spend the money, it's how you spend the money.
And so the final link to that is that at some point the battery technology, which is still pretty expensive, will catch up and start to get less and less expensive. At that point, then you can make the wind and solar energy sources operate 24/7, because you can storage energy when the wind isn't blowing or when the sun isn't shining. So that's the trend right now that's happening, and that's how this fits into the big picture.